Hello all, welcome to study 65 of the Solving Studies to Improve Chess Calculation series. This study comes from Mark Liburkin. He was also known by being one of the editors of the Shachmati v SSR magazine, a Soviet chess magazine published during the 20th century. He is a great chess composer. He was a perfectionist. Normally, he was composing and waiting to it to be perfect before publishing. So most of his studies were only published after some years of him having developed them. Uh, I also find it interesting that he brings new approaches to studies, like the chameleon echo team, and where you can have more than one line with interesting mate. It's going to be the situation over here. Uh, uh, this is not going to be the last one. I will for sure soon bring you one that I find very incredible because he produced it in 1939 or 38, and it's a study that even nowadays stockfish, the strongest stockfish, can't solve it. And this is amazing. Well, but that for later on the series. For the moment, let's stay with this one. As always, I suggest you watch the guide so you are better prepared for the practice. If you have already, then the countdown will start and I catch you back with the solution. And here we are, and as always, let's start with the right first move, which is knight c1 exclamation mark. Okay, let's look at the position. It's easy to see that we have two pawns, we want to win, and the rook is threatening to take one, then come back and take the other. So the only way to be able to stop this one is to find a very direct way to threaten the rook if it comes back. So the idea of knight c1 is very fast to show up because we are threatening to go knight b3, checking the king and forcing the rook. So the idea is I come to c1, if the rook takes the pawn, then I advance my pawn, so threatening to promote. If the rook comes back, I check it and fork the king and grab the rook. So the first move, I think, it's relatively obvious. Now it's black to play. We already see the idea. If the rook takes the pawn, I advance my pawn. Okay, but let's stay a bit more to the other alternative strong line, which is to check our king. If the rook first check our king, of course, we need to go to c2. The idea now is the rook to take the pawn, then come back with check and take with the tempo, not being able to allow white to go with the knight to b3. Of course, it's now black to play. Uh, if the rook takes the pawn, well, let's see that just in a bit. Well, we first check the king, so the king needs to move, and now we advance the pawn. So the idea was good, but white first checks and then goes back. So this one doesn't work. That's why black tries to keep checking the king again. Now the king has basically two possibilities to progress. So either it goes to d2 with some ideas of blocking with the knight, something like that, or goes to d3. The right move is going to d3. But first, let's see what happens if I go to d2. Well, here it's a draw. Why? Because suddenly the rook can take one pawn. I advance the other pawn, and now suddenly I can get a surprise with a check. The king moves, but now black has this last resource, which is to go with the rook to c2, a brilliant move, of course, threatening to take the pawn. And if I take the rook, well, it's a draw by stalemate. My king can't move, my black king can't move, and it's not checked. So it's a very intelligent sacrifice. Uh, so this one doesn't work. Let's see what happens if I go to d3 on this line. Well, now the rook takes the pawn. Of course, now I advance it, so the threat is the same. And okay, this is not going to be so easy, but the reply from white, I hope it's going to be very direct. I sacrifice my rook, so the idea is if I promote it, if I take the rook with a queen or a knight or a rook, it's going to be a draw, either because it will be stalemate, so at the moment the king can't move, or because if I promote to a knight, I will have two knights against the king, which is also a draw. So the only way to win is to promote to a bishop, and now I have knight and bishop against the king, which is a win for black. So this was the line where the rook didn't went with taking the pawn. But now let's see what happens if I take the pawn. If I take the pawn, of course, white advances the pawn. So the rook now can't come back to c5 because I will have the fork on b3, so checks the king. Okay, if the king moves to the b file, to the c file, well, I can check the king and grab the pawn. I will have one tempo. And if the king goes to the other side, let's say, for example, if it goes to e2, I simply can check it again. Let's say, for example, now the king comes to d3. Well, I can simply go, and I am guaranteeing the draw, because when the pawn promotes, I will take it. Of course, I will also go directly to grab it. Uh, so we have a situation over here. If the king can't move, what can I do? Well, what can I do is this brilliant blocking by the knight. Why? Because now if the rook takes the knight, of course the rook can't go back to grab the pawn, so needs to take the knight. But now the king attacks the rook, which forces the rook to move away. If it goes over here, it's the last resource from black. Do you find the winning move? Well, it's a theoretical end game. We don't promote to queen, we promote to rook. Because if we promote to queen, then it's simply draw by stalemate when the king takes the rook. Every square, it's impossible to move for the black king. The black king is not in check, so black has found a way to draw it. So over here, we simply promote to the rook. We allow the check. Of course, now we are not going to be tricked. Simply take the rook. And if the rook goes, for example, over here, we simply attack the rook. The rook now needs to move whatever it does. I am threatening checkmate. So if the king moves to the side, I take the rook. So it's game over for black. Whatever it does, it's going to be a win. Okay, from the beginning, it looked a bit harder, but we were able to find a way to win this one. I hope you have enjoyed. As promised, I will have soon another one, a brilliant one that beats even Stockfish from Mark Luberkin. And see you again in future studies. Bye bye.